Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. We're going to start with an animation over the last 16 hours of our national kind of mosaic radar here. And you can see the main pieces that have been moving across the country. We have what was left of Fred continuing to cause flooding problems in New England. We have a shortwave that's cutting through the Appalachian Mountains. You can see it right here, putting down some precip first in along the Ohio River Valley and into the Tennessee Valley. And then the front stretched back to the west here. That's also had some scattered storms on it. We're fueling that with a lot of Gulf moisture coming right up into this area. You can see some heavy rain in through here. And the third feature is the deeper trough that is cut out of parts of Utah and is moving toward Wyoming. And on the leading edge of this, we have some severe weather late this afternoon, and we're going to watch this carefully into the overnight hours. Now, from this radar image, I want to take you over and show you some of the latest satellite data. And as we look here, I'm just going to walk you back and forth through the afternoon and show you a couple of things here. Now, that wave that's coming through the Intermountain West here, again, we can already see some of the larger storms popping here, and there is a risk today that these storms will not only produce potentially large hail and strong straight line winds, but also there's plenty of wind shear to get these to rotate. You can see on the backside how the smoke is now coming out of the north across the western part of the United States, and this is really filled in through the Central Valley of California, and it's continuing to cause major air quality issues in this region. Outside of that, there's a lot of scattered convection to be talking about. I'm talking about scattered storms, and you can see storms popping in through here along that boundary. Some very heavy rain we talked about in there. But look at the kind of the lone storms that are out here in parts of Texas, or even look at these ones right here over parts of Illinois and Indiana. I'd like to show you those a little bit closer. Let's go right in through here and kind of see what kind of maybe got these storms going today. Because as I rock back and forth, it's kind of neat. You can see that by midday today, we had the lake breeze. You can see it moving away from Lake Michigan, and a lot of storms were initiated on that lake breeze. Some of those put down some very heavy rain, for example, in and around Chicago. But look a little farther to the south at the storms popping over parts of Indiana. I've spent a lot of time the last few days in Indiana talking about this scattered storm setup that we're going to be seeing here. And it's interesting because one of these cells right here, very healthy, put down a large downdraft, and then it completely abandoned its updraft, probably rained right through it and cut it off. So the outflow is moving away, the updraft abandoned, and here's what's left over. This is just high thin cirrus, and it's almost completely gone. Now you can see new storms late in the day are blowing up on the outflow of old storms, and we're going to see a lot of this, not only just now through the end of August, but beyond that as well. But if I go back to that continental sector view, there it is, we're going to talk next about what's going on with our tropical systems, and we're going to focus here on Henri. Now, I mispronounced that on Monday, calling it Henri. I looked up the pronunciation right after I recorded and posted the video, and I'm like, shoot, I got it wrong. Well, Henri, which is right here, is currently a tropical storm, but its max sustained winds are 65 miles an hour, meaning about another 9 miles an hour faster, and we would be calling this Hurricane Henri. So I want to talk about this one the most because Grace is heading toward Mexico after crossing the Yucatan today, and we do expect it to strengthen back to hurricane. Fred, we've dealt with Fred for a while, bringing flooding all along this trajectory right in through here. But the major changes throughout the week are those that we observed with Henri. And here's the latest updates that we've got. You can see here in the forecast graphic put out by the European model, takes the ensemble average track and pulls it back toward parts of New England before letting this finally get pushed out to the open Atlantic. And I'd like to just talk with you about what changed this week to make that happen. A lot of it has to do with the steering level winds, the mid-level winds of the atmosphere. So we're going to go out here to the 21st late in the day, and there's the circulation for Henri in the middle of the atmosphere. Now the jet stream pattern's running into a ridge here. There's a trough to the south, but there's also smaller ridges, one there and one right here that I want to be looking at carefully, because it's ultimately the circulation around all three of these features that has helped steer Henri closer to parts of like maybe Long Island, but certainly Rhode Island and Massachusetts and Connecticut. And it'll do that before making this turn coming back out to open ocean. Meanwhile, behind it, we're going to watch troughs coming into the northwest. We've been talking about that. And an expanding ridge in this area, which will with time back up to the west. That's the bigger picture things that are going on right now. So from there, I'm going to keep this discussion going about the tropics because we're going to notice with some slight shifts in the position and strength of the MJO that by the time we get out there to about days 6 through 10, the upper levels of the atmosphere are going to be quite conducive to rising motion over parts of this section of the East Pacific, but also the Caribbean and the Gulf and the Western Atlantic, meaning that we've kind of taken the cap or the lid off of the atmosphere in that area, allowing for deeper tropical convection or bigger tropical thunderstorms. And that's part of the reason why in days 6 through 9 from the European ensemble, that we are starting to see higher probabilities of something developing not only here, but also here as well. Now, nothing is set in stone. We don't have any guidance on this, not from the National Hurricane Center or from any of the models. I'm just trying to let you know that the situation is evolving in a way that could let something come out of this area. And unlike Grace, which went in that direction, we need to watch to see if something gets into the Gulf of Mexico, because as you've heard me say many times, we've had open northward transport of Gulf of Mexico moisture for a while, which means if a hurricane gets into this area or even a tropical storm, the likelihood of it continuing that northward track is relatively high as well. So we're going to have to watch that very, very carefully. Now, looking back over the last 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation here, we've got the path of Fred. We have the scattered storms that have stretched from the Tennessee and Ohio River Valley here back into Texas. And some places in Texas have gotten just absolutely hammered with very heavy rainfall here in the last few days. Now, that's not to put anything down here about what's happened along Fred's track, but the rains in through this area were much better predicted than the scattered convection, which dumped in some places 6 to 10 inches of rain from southern Oklahoma through north, central, and eastern Texas. And then we also have the system that's coming out of parts of Utah today, and we're going to watch this area very carefully for some severe storms. And that system's on its way toward the northern plains. So we need to talk about who's going to miss out and who's going to be getting a lot of this precipitation as we move forward. But to do that, I'd like to first look at a series of images I put together this afternoon. They're going to encompass all of summer. And we're going to start this on June the 1st and go through August the 17th. Now, on this map, I need to work on it a little bit more, and I'm sorry for that. But I overlaid numbers on top of the color to tell you the percent of normal precipitation that we've had since June 1st. Now, since then, that would be 78 days. That's 78 days worth of data that we're looking at here. And over that time period, well, let's just do this. I'm going to lop off all of these areas that have had better than 60% of normal. So I'm going to get rid of everything that's above that part of the color bar, starting right here. And that means we're going to lose the wet conditions we've seen in the southwestern monsoon. The wet conditions across almost the whole of the Cotton Belt and in through this section here of the Corn Belt into the Northeast. If we get rid of it, what we're left with is this. Now, the idea here is to show you those locations that during the summer time period, June 1st through August 17th, where we have been less than 60% of normal on precipitation. And why this is important is we're bringing precip right now through this area, and will eventually extend over toward the Red River Valley of the north. And there will be scattered storms, as you already heard me talk about here, that's going to move through parts of Iowa and Minnesota as well. Some of those could possibly be severe as well. But the idea I'm trying to show you here is just a better way of masking the data to see where our areas of par precipitation really are. Hopefully this was kind of clear. I decided to do one other thing as well, and I made a map that looks at the number of days where we had precipitation greater than 1/10 of an inch over that 78-day time period. So pause the video if you'd like, because the number you see over your particular area, like this number is very close to, Cedar Rapids, for example, 9. There's only been 9 days in this area over the last 78 that they've measured more than 1/10 of an inch of rain. And now you can really start to see and digest the haves and the have-nots with this precipitation pattern. And that's just what I wanted to illustrate. Because that deeper trough that's coming into the west, which we've been talking about, is going to change things up. So today, the rest of today, this is going to be our main target area to watch for those severe storms. And you already saw them blowing up already. I just showed you that at the beginning of this video. And then tomorrow, that severe weather risk translates farther to the east and runs into parts of Minnesota and Iowa, but also back in parts of Nebraska and South Dakota as well, and maybe northern northern Missouri. But I was thinking about Indiana because I'm wanting to know how far to the east these storms do make it. And so I'm going to use some of the guidance here from the latest, from the 18Z run from the NAM model. So this is what we had this afternoon. And if we play it through this evening, just a lot of scattered storms. Look at all this. This is the area we're watching for the severe storms this afternoon, but some heavy rains, lower Mississippi River Valley, Appalachian Mountains, possibly even to this part of the Carolinas as well. But as I play this forward going into the overnight hours tonight and early tomorrow morning, this is 8 a.m., this is now noon, and we're getting into afternoon. You're going to see once again on the heat of the day, this will be the area we're going to watch for some of those strong to severe storms to erupt first. More widespread rain on the backside, and this is bringing in some desperately needed rain to parts of Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and of course North Dakota as well, where some of these storms could be severe as well. But then as we watch go into the overnight hours, that line there, it's very narrow, and its speed will be important to monitor. We're going to see the storms coming through this region. And then getting into those overnight hours, we see that it gets to about the Mississippi River by 4 or 5 a.m. on Saturday. And then as it spreads into western Illinois and southwestern Wisconsin early in the morning, I'm going to watch to see how well the models were able to capture this, because this is a pretty long line here along this front that will then move through Illinois and possibly dissipate through midday. But could we see more storms pop on that later in the day through Michigan and Indiana? I think we could. And by the way, here's the next wave that's coming through. And we don't typically use the NAM to forecast hurricanes, but this is what it's got for the position of Henri at this point on Sunday early in the morning. So we're going to watch that very carefully overall. Now from here, I'd like to do a multi-model analysis on the next 7 days. And it's interesting, the differences in the models. So we're going to scrutinize both of these very carefully. Here's what I want to start with. This is what the European model suggests we're going to get in the next 7 days from the 12Z run. All right. Now take a close look at this, because I'm going to immediately flip it over to the GFS, same time period. Now you notice there's a resolution difference, but where they're placing the heaviest precipitation is quite different as well. And as I normally do, let's just overlay them and look at those differences. So remember, these colors represent where the European model's wetter over the next 7 days from the 12Z run today, and this is where the GFS is wetter. Now, what I notice is, let's go east to west. The European is taking the heaviest rains from Henri further inland than what the GFS is doing. See how the GFS is wetter farther offshore? Next, if I were in parts of Illinois and Indiana, this area right here, the GFS is bringing in those rains that would set that crop and possibly finish it. But the European is much more stingy with the rainfall into that area because of what it's doing with these troughs that are going through the northwestern part of the Corn Belt. Now notice how much wetter the European is in through here, while the GFS is wetter on the backside. And the European is wetter farther to the south as well. Now, the European has done a much better job all season long with the scattered convection in this part of the Cotton Belt. So I'm going to trust the European model down there. But now that we've kind of drawn all over this, let me just remove those. You pause it if you'd like and take a close look at the differences here. And now what I want to do is I want to do a comparison. Now we know it all begins with the upper level pattern, so why don't we start there? This is the GFS on the left, the European on the right. Now overall, the models have the pattern relatively similar through the next 30 hours. That takes us out to Friday night, getting into Saturday morning. But some of the differences here that start to show up are in the placement in the GFS and strength of Henri, difference between that and the European, and the position of these two troughs. It may look as though they're almost in the exact same position, but they're not. The European is more farther downstream than the GFS, and that's why the GFS brought more rain back farther to the west than the European did in the northern plains. As we keep going through here, the models are at least attempting to put together the same look by the time we get out there to Sunday afternoon. But as we then go into next week, things start to diverge a little bit. And we expect that, right? We don't expect them to always stay in lockstep. And the changes start to show up here with the GFS being much more progressive with this trough, where the European leaves it lingering back farther. Then as we go forward from there, that's going to change everything getting out into next week and pretty deep into next week. So I know we're doing a very quick review of what the difference is in these models at that point, but it's good to take that view so we can then compare these maps. So let's get those back to where we can see them well. I've got the GFS on the left and I've got the European on the right. And I've worked on the GFS color bar so that I hope it's a bit more consistent with what I have for the European. Now, as we play this forward, let's go out through the day tomorrow on Friday. This is 7 a.m., getting into midday, and then in the evening. Now remember, with the slower progression of the wave, the GFS is wetter on the backside, the European's wetter on the front side and south. See the differences here? And interestingly enough, they both have Henri in about the same spot, and same thing with Grace. I like that, although the GFS is much more aggressive with the development of Grace. Scattered storms across the whole of the southeast on Friday evening. It's in both models. Now as we go forward, let's get into Saturday. They're trying to take this through Manitoba into Ontario. Both are. And Henri strengthening here in the GFS, and it is there too in the European, although it's a little bit weaker. There will be a front. Remember, we talked about that on Saturday morning coming through this area. And the models are sweeping that through and increasing rainfall. Now remember, there's a trailing wave to this. It's starting to show up here, and both models have it. But as we go forward, this is now getting out to Sunday morning and afternoon. You see once again that the GFS is wetter on the backside, where we saw that, and the European is a little drier. Now, what's going to happen here with Henri? Take a look at the differences. The GFS, is over here, farther offshore than the European. As we play this forward, we take that next wave right here. In fact, they're in lockstep with the timing. Just earlier, some differences in precipitation. It goes right there on the border between Manitoba and Ontario. It will leave a front in this area, bringing in more rain for this part of the upper Midwest. And it's still here in the GFS, although not nearly as generous with the rainfall. So these differences are subtle, but I'm overall, despite showing you that map a few moments ago, going, wow, they are producing the same features. Now, I've taken you all the way out to next Tuesday into Wednesday morning. And there's yet another disturbance right in through here. That's that next wave that's coming through. And both models are producing precipitation on it. And then as we go forward from there, look at this. Something's coming through in the European out there next Thursday morning. And there is a similar feature based on the position of this high in both models. Right there. See it? So the differences are subtle, but they could be substantial for any given location. But overall, I'm happy with the performance of the models. Now, take your attention away, since we're out here past a week, take your attention away from the midsection of the United States, which is where I've been focusing, and look down at what's happening coming out of the Caribbean. Interestingly enough, out here day 9, both models are attempting to do something in this area and possibly bring some sort of a tropical system. Maybe here, maybe there, but that's what I'm concerned about. I showed you that a few minutes ago with the tropical forecast getting out that far, and that's almost to the very end of the month. Now, let's distill this down into this graphic. It looks at the next week and the probability of getting an inch of rainfall. The probability of an inch of rainfall. And you can see the color bar on the bottom. So, where those troughs are cutting through, highest chances of rain falling through here. Henri, doing this. And that stalled out boundary right here in parts of the Mid-South, producing some heavier rains. As I showed you at the beginning, a lot of what will be tucked in between all of this will either be on that advancing line of storms this weekend, and then on scattered storms other than that. All right? So from there, where's the pattern head by the time we get out to day 10? That's what you're looking at. We build a large ridge in the Bering Sea, another one over the Hudson Bay, and the flow is going to go around it into this trough coming here right along British Columbia. Now, much of the pattern across the United States and the GFS is relatively flat. But with the progression of this trough coming through, this is what the GFS does for the week 2 precipitation. It once again gives you a relatively drier bias along the Gulf Coast. It's got storms from the Appalachian Mountains toward the northeast. As that trough advances, it keeps this area more open for scattered thunderstorm development. Now, does the European model agree with this? It's almost got an identical flow pattern at day 10. Ridge, ridge, trough. See it? And it's going to have that come through. So the European model has this area wetter than normal back toward this part of Saskatchewan. It's got more Gulf moisture transport, which it's been doing a better job of than the GFS. It's got near normal to possibly wetter than normal conditions pushing up to the northeast. I like this. I'd like to see both models giving us something in terms of some consistency in their forecasts. So if that's our look at what precipitation is doing through the next 14 days, let's now go over and talk about temperatures. So I wanted to make a map. Now this is using the corn formula, but this is through the 17th, beginning on April 1st. So April 1st through August 17th, looking at the total accumulated GDUs. Now, I made a typo. It looks like this starts on April 1st, 2021. But I'm looking here at these numbers, and what I'm trying to assess is, for a lot of folks that grow corn in the midsection of the country, we tend to hone in on a number around 2,400 or 2,500 GDUs total accumulated. Now, this assumes you planted on April 1st. I know a lot of us, of course, didn't do that. But I can break this down and just kind of color code it for you. This is the percent of 2,500 GDUs that locations around the United States have made it to. So, for example, where I was today near the Quad Cities, 94% of the way there. Again, that assumes April 1st as a planting date. Everything that's white, we've surpassed that number. So I just want to show you here, and I know we grow a different relative maturity group in the Dakotas, but if we're looking at that 2,500 number, we're sitting somewhere between 70 and 90% of the way there. Same thing for Minnesota and Iowa. Next, what are the temperatures doing when we look at the stress side of it? Remember, I've showed you this a few times, the stress degree days. We're adding up anything over 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Dr. Elwyn Taylor's research tells us if you get above 140, we tend to lose corn yield. And so in green, I have every location that's below it, and in red, I have those locations that are already surpassing that number. And we had quite a bit of heat in this area this week. The question is, are the plains going to continue to get that, and what about the west? And are we going to be able to break past that number here in parts of the eastern half of the Corn Belt and Great Lakes states? So let's get an answer there. Temperatures first. Let's blow this up so we can see it. These were Thursday's highs. Really cool air in the west right now, and it's going to press east. That's Friday, getting into Saturday and Sunday. Okay. Now, we saw that after that wave moves up toward the Hudson Bay, we are going to see some warmth rebounding here in the midsection of the country toward the northeast and all the way down to the Gulf Coast. So Monday's high temperatures, Tuesday and Wednesday. Well, this is the next trough that slides through midweek next week, which we talked about. But if you're to the east or south of it, we're going to see some warmer conditions. And we already notice once we get out there about the 25th, heat is building back into the western United States. So we'll break it down by looking out here at this map, which shows you day 5 through 10. So again, that's that next trough that comes through. But we're going to be, generally speaking, anywhere between 3 and 10 degrees above average in through here. And as we expected by day 10 through 15, we do have the pretty strong signals of the warmth returning to the midsection of the country and also building at times back into parts of the west. But you saw where the ridges were, and there was a broader trough in through here, which could keep parts of Washington and Oregon much closer to normal. So that's your next 2 weeks. I want to keep this quite simple in the long range for this video tonight. And I want to start with what that MJO is doing. I think right now, because I've looked at angular momentum, I've looked at any sort of blocking patterns across anywhere in the northern hemisphere, I've looked at ocean temperatures and the evolution of this La Nina, but I think the more dominant signal is actually coming out of what the MJO is doing. And unlike, and this is where we got this wrong, or I got this wrong, unlike what I thought, which was the MJO traversing into phase 3, 4, and 5, we now see that the near-term forecasts are popping it right back out over into phase 1. And that's important for tropical systems, but that puts us back to where we began the month of August. And if that's the most dominant signal, then I'd look at this new forecast for the month of September, and I would remind you that even though we had a similar forecast for August where there was a lot of precipitation, it was all coming in scattered storms, which is why at the very beginning of this I said you can see the nature of those scattered storms and how they locally produce heavy rain and really snuff a lot of other folks out and give them nothing. We're going to see, I think, more of that throughout September. Interestingly enough, the European model is not seeing better chances for tropical systems to come here along the East Coast. And I want to remind you of something. These models are not designed to do that. They're not capable of doing that at month timescales. But we'll look at this and we'll take it at face value and measure against it. That's what I'm going to be doing, all right? I appreciate your attention today. We'll talk to you again on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend. Thanks.